How a Romance Novel Saved the Galaxy by Ariana de Relte. Chapter 73. John Antilles 5. What? John winced as the cry filtered through the bulkheads. When they had finally seen Osan's family approaching the ship, Osan had hustled him into the medbay again and hesitantly given him a code to lock the door. "You're injured!" said Osan fiercely when John gave him a confused look. "I will not let my Dikude elite set your recovery back by trying to hug you or something! You wait here while I explain everything. Just be ready for a noise." So that was what the man had meant. There was silence for a few more moments before a high-pitched "Sing!" echoed through the ship. John was a little bit afraid to know who had done that. A few minutes later, the door slid open, revealing a teenage human crouched near the panel, obviously having just sliced the controls. They had dirty blonde hair and slanted round eyes. Said eyes traveled the length of his body down to his boots, then up again to his face. "Oh my Kara! I thought he was pulling a prank, but then Osan never pulls pranks." They came over and poked against his robes, then squeezed his arm under the robot's sweater. "Wow!" Said John. They got a look of fear on their face and stepped away from him, holding their heads up. "Whoops! I'm Yo, Osan's bodyguard. He told us not to bother you, so I very much didn't touch you. Got that?" John nodded. She stared at him, face slowly turning red before abruptly shaking her head. "Okay, I'm going to go now. Later, Osan's boyfriend." She paused with her hand on the door trigger. "Oh yeah, can I get a holla with you before I go?" "No," said John flatly. She sighed and triggered the door. Yo was still looking back at him, so she didn't notice that Osan was standing right outside. They collided with a small clank of his armor hitting the teenager's head. "Ow!" "Yo!" Osan growled. "Coming!" Yo ducked past him and ran. "You little!" He ran after her, shouting some word in Mandoa that John didn't know. John sighed and triggered the door shut again. That lasted all of a minute before the door slid open again, revealing a gray-skinned Powan of indeterminate gender. They ducked down to pass through the doorway, then stared at him for a long moment before laughing in a flash of sharp teeth. Well, was all they had time to say before Osan's voice echoed down the corridor. "Babodu, get out of my fucking infirmary!" The Powan turned to go, banged his head on the top of the door, then also ran away with just as much dignity as Yo had. Namely, none. This must be the Babodu who had taped pictures of John all over the ship, including the one that was still staring at John from the infirmary wall. John sighed. It had only been a few hours, but he felt the need to meditate. Again. Osan held back a sigh. Why had he agreed to do this? Curse that Jedi's sexy scars. It had taken him several minutes to explain his and John's so-called relationship. He was essentially claiming that John had been on the ship for the few days his elite had been gone, and not the few hours it had really been. Then he'd realized that his vodka was missing and had to chase both her and his Babodu through the ship with accompanying threats for their idiocy. The two had run to the cockpit to handle the takeoff to avoid his lecturing. "Where's he sleeping? We don't have any extra bunks." He used his bore as a light with interest. She had been lingering near the cockpit since she was usually the one to supervise takeoff. Ozan glared at her. "With me, since my vodka and Bavudu have proven John won't be saving the damn infirmary!" Boor held up her hands in a stop gesture. "Of course, I was just wondering." She looked thoughtful. "Maybe he wants to spar." Unbor must have felt his glare, even though she wasn't looking at him. "Only when he's healed, Asika." As always, she super-emphasized the "ah" in the word so as not to confuse it with Asik, i.e. shit. "But wow, can you imagine him once he is? Even if he beats me into the ground." Osan groaned. "I'm begging you, Burr. Please, stop." They entered the central area that served as their mess. An oval-shaped table with a bench seat and stools was against one wall. Suspiciously, everyone was there, Even his Babodoos, Ad, who was usually on a long comm call with their Shiare at this point after a mission, Babodoo, Sune, and Yeo must have snuck around the other side of the circular corridor that ran around the edge of the ship to get there before them. He glared particularly at them. I'm going to get John. If you do anything to put him off eating, I will make your lives miserable. Got that? He threatened. His Babodoo just smiled like the threat amused him, even though he had definitely been running from Osan earlier. The others nodded eagerly. Osan trusted none of them, but somehow they did behave, at least long enough for John to come in and take a tentative seat at the table. Osan quickly gave his elites names before insisting John start eating. The food was just the same fare as before, but the man needed the calories. I can't wait until we exchange the Gothos payment and we get some good food. Otor's hub will be perfect for it, said Unbor. Can we get some roasted pork, Bor? Asked Yo. Oh, yes. Bor was practically drooling at the thought. Where are we going after that, John? I can't go get John, right? Asked his Babodoo. Why are you asking me? Asked John. Osan took the opportunity to top up his bowl of soup. Don't you have to, go wherever the Jedi tell you to go? So if you and Osan want to go on an actual date instead of canoodling here on our ship, you need to tell us where so we can plan to find some jobs while you're doing your own work. John mouthed the word canoodling, looking confused, but then shook it off. I go wherever the Force wills me. He got a somewhat annoyed look on his face. And right now the Force says to follow Osan. Aww, cooed Shen, Babadoo's oldest. They all side-eyed the man who had muscles bulging from every inch of him. Nobody could tell if he was mocking or being serious. The rest of dinner was his family essentially grilling John for information, though they did let up enough to let the 4 Jedi eat after John gave them one-word answers for the 6th time in a row. Apparently his only opinion on the planet they'd last been on was muddy. John made to go back to the infirmary after the meal, but Osan steered him towards his quarters. He still had a few clothes strewn about in his quest to find John something to wear, but he otherwise kept it tidy. His bed was actually a soft pad on a metal shelf that pulled out of the wall. He normally kept it pulled out only far enough for one person to sleep, leaving a corridor to walk to the end of the room, but it did pull out completely to the other side of the narrow room, giving them just enough space for 2 people to lay next to each other. I don't trust my elite not to mess with you during the night, and you staying in here will reinforce our dating status, explained Osan, feeling a bit nervous suddenly. He was going to have a handsome Jedi in his bed. Come to think of it, it had been years since he'd had anyone in his bed. Taking care of his elite was a full-time job. John nodded. Your Babodoo does seem to be planning something. He's radiating mischief in the Force. Well, I won't have you putting your healing back. You're to lay on your stomach tonight, so you don't put pressure on your wound. I'll check it again tomorrow. You can try other positions once you've healed. Thank the Kara, Osan wasn't brother blushing as his mind jumped to other more interesting positions. Oh, and here's a pad with the Mandalorians' dilemma on it. Maybe reading it will help you understand some of the fuss everyone's making. John regarded it dubiously, but shrugged off his robes and boots, leaving him in the warm sweater and long trousers of Osan's Babodoo. He carefully climbed into the bed and laid down on his stomach, the pad in front of him. Osan took off his vambraces, which were the last of his armor he'd still had on, then set the lock and alarm on the door in a way he usually didn't bother. He dimmed the lights, leaving just the flicker of the false candle he'd been given years ago as a gift from his boar. Osan climbed in next to the Jedi, laying on his back. Only his right arm was brushing up against John, who held himself very still for several moments before relaxing into the contact. They were going to have to fix that if they wanted to sell this fake relationship. We should be able to replace your Jedi garb on Otor's hub. They have a bit of everything. Jedi robes seem to be just basic modified farmer's garb, so it should be easy enough to find. Agreed John. He sounded sleepy. You could take all the stones the goat house left me to sell so I could pay my way. The Force will provide the rest. Not the Jedi Temple? Last time I was close enough to the core to access my so-called expense account, they had deactivated it because they thought I was dead. I fixed it that time, but I have no idea if they think I'm alive at the moment. It's easier to just let the Force keep me supplied. Can you tell the Force to do a better job feeding you? Asked Osan. He glanced over to see John giving him a bemused look. I think that might be why the Force led me to you. Ozan bit the inside of his lip to stop him saying more. He spent a long time before he fell asleep listening to the breathing of the ridiculously handsome Jedi sleeping next to him. His Bavo was wearing his boucher everywhere for the next few days. Both John and Osan groaned when Unbor nervously pointed out the man's post on the JetiNet where he was charging a ridiculous amount of credits for candid hollows of John Antilles. Right, time for revenge. The trip to Otor's hub would take a few more days, so Osan sent alerts to all his elite's comms. They were all overdue for a general checkup and an update on their vaccinations. He'd have them walking around and calling him a vampire by the time this was over. And in the meantime, it was time to check on his boyfriend's health. "What are you doing?" asked John. He made no effort to stop Osan from taking the blood, at least. "Finding out if crazy space wizards believe in vaccinations," is what should have come out of his mouth. Instead, checking you for STDs and making sure the poison is gone. He ignored the stare John was giving him as he inserted the blood in the scanner. Before beginning a sexual relationship, it's good to get both partners tested. He was so glad he wasn't prone to blushing. Speaking of, he drew some of his own blood and put it into the secondary scanner. He set it up to display the results of the STD panel and turned it towards John. "You can check mine." He turned his attention to John's results, though he only cursorily looked at the STD panel. Considering how antisocial this particular Jedi was, it was unsurprising he had no issues STD-wise. His antibody tests, however, were a terrifying mix of commonly vaccinated against childhood diseases and illnesses that were so obscure his scanner was having trouble identifying them all. "You need to get a booster shot for Minarch fever, and there's been a new vaccine developed for the Rhinceria virus. We'll get them at Otor's hub." Along with the long list of vaccinations his elite were now scheduled to receive. After all, maybe one day they'd go to Rhodia and need to be inoculated against Rhodian swamp fever. It was a very painful shot that needed to be done in a series over several months. Osan looked forward to telling them after the final shot that the immunity only lasted a year, which is why the vaccination was rarely recommended unless you lived in the Rhodian swamps. "Are we having sex then?" asked John, causing Osan to choke on nothing. He took in a deep breath, staring at the Jedi. Only if you want to. My family would never believe I slept with you without checking you over, though. I forced them to watch and read so many sexual education docs. And this is normal in relationships. It's normal in my relationships, but I don't think your fan club is going to check that we're having sex. Osan sincerely hoped they didn't try to, but the club did have some insane members. We probably should practice more displays of affection for our first date, though. Like what? John really seemed to have no idea what a relationship looked like, despite reading the romance novel by now, though Osan supposed it wasn't exactly a normal dating scene when you're on the run across the desert from evil Mandalorians and scientists with a kid. Maybe Osan should make him a list of other reading material? You know, holding hands, kissing, hugging. Humans in relationships touch each other. Osan had no idea how his feral Jedi wasn't touch-starved if he had such limited interactions with other beings. Then again, from the way he stiffened whenever they touched while in bed, maybe he was. John looked grim. We definitely have space to practice. We'll start tonight. Kara, then start tonight. In the bed that Osan was somehow sharing with his fake boyfriend. Why had Osan agreed to this crazy plan? He looked at the handsome, determined face of John Antilles. Oh yeah, that's mine. They arrived at Otor's hub to the news that the Mandalore had called all true Mandalorians back to Mandalore to boot out Deathwatch. Not many on the Outer Rim had left, probably because they were at least a week away by even the fastest ship. Hell's rumors were that the assault had already happened, despite the lack of official announcement. Osan's family went to sell the materials the Gotals had given them in payment, then were off in a whirlwind of shopping and no doubt drinking in the space station's cantinas. Meanwhile, he and John had gone to buy John some clothes. Once in the Jedi-style tunics, John seemed a little more relaxed, that is, up until they decided to leave on their date. The moment they stepped outside, they had been followed. John was basically hiding under his hood, his face covered in shadow for the whole time. By the time they sat down in the restaurant and ordered, their tales had multiplied. Osan looked around and sighed. He was so very unimpressed by the John Antilles fan club. Their rules to not bother John Antilles and his chosen partner were awesome. Are they really being that obvious? Asked John, finally shucking the hood. He turned in his seat to look at the three Mando Ade crowded in a booth in the small restaurant. They were wearing full armor and raised their cocking menus to hide their faces when John looked. Nothing else. Just their boucher. As if the rest of their armor wasn't visible. Ozan sighed again. They really are. John tilted his head. Or they are acting as a distraction. He abruptly reached under the table and pulled out a listening device, which he dropped on the table. A twist of John's fingers above it, and the device was in broken pieces. Kara, that was so hot! He could probably take apart anyone or thing in this room without touching them. Ozan didn't shout at him to stop doing attractive things, but it was a near thing. He was 100% certain John had no idea what he was doing. He sighed. In fact, there was a head tilt again. The only non-Mandalorian in this place is the owner, John pronounced. Ozan noted the nearest table, cringed. He was rather impressed, honestly. He'd never have pegged two Rhodians wearing matching shirts that said, I visited Kashyyyk and all I got was this shirt in pink furry letters as Mando Ade. He motioned the owner over. Can we have a food to go? There was no way he was letting John skip a meal. He counted it as a win when John took his offered hand as they left and didn't flinch at the contact. The not nearly as sexy as Ozan had imagined evenings of practice had paid off, at least.